Gollum was captured in Mordor in the year 3017 and taken to Barad-dûr and there questioned and tormented. When he had learned what he could from him, Sauron released him and sent him forth again. He did not trust Gollum, for he divined something indomitable in him, which could not be overcome, even by the shadow of fear, except by destroying him. But Sauron perceived the depths of Gollum's malice towards those that had robbed him, and guessing that he would go in search of them to avenge himself, Sauron hoped that his spies would thus be led to the ring. Gollum, however, was before long captured by Aragorn and taken to northern Mirkwood, and though he was followed, he could not be rescued before he was in safe keeping. Now Sauron had never paid heed to the halflings, even if he had heard of them, and he did not yet know where their land lay. From Gollum, even under pain, he could not get any clear account, both because Gollum indeed had no certain knowledge himself, and because what he knew he falsified. Ultimately, indomitable he was, except by death, as Sauron guessed, both from his halfling nature and from a cause which Sauron did not fully comprehend, being himself consumed by lust for the ring. Then he became filled with a hatred of Sauron, even greater than his terror, seeing in him truly his greatest enemy and rival. Thus it was that he dared to pretend that he believed that the land of the halflings was near to the places where he had once dwelt beside the banks of the Gladden. Now Sauron, learning of the capture of Gollum by the chiefs of his enemies, was in great haste and fear. Yet all his ordinary spies and emissaries could bring him no tidings, and this was due largely both to the vigilance of the Dunedain and to the treachery of Saruman, whose own servants either waylaid or misled the servants of Sauron. Of this Sauron became aware, but his arm was not yet long enough to reach Saruman in Isengard. Therefore he hid his knowledge of Saruman's double-dealing and concealed his wrath, biding his time and preparing for the great war in which he planned to sweep all his enemies into the Western Sea. At length he resolved that no others would serve him in this case but his mightiest servants, the Ringwraiths, who had no will but his own, being utterly subservient to the ring that had enslaved him, which Sauron held. Now few could withstand even one of these fell creatures, and as Sauron deemed, none could withstand them when gathered together under their terrible captain, the Lord of Morgul. Yet this weakness they had for Sauron's present purpose, so great was the terror that went with them, even invisible and unclad, that their coming forth might soon be perceived, and their mission be guessed by the wise. So it was that Sauron prepared 2 strokes, in which many after saw the beginnings of the War of the Ring. They were made together. The orcs assailed the realm of Thranduil, with orders to recapture Gollum, and the Lord of Morgul was sent forth openly to battle against Gondor. These things were done towards the end of June 3018. Thus Sauron tested the strength and preparedness of Denethor, and found them more than he had hoped. But that troubled him little, since he had used little force in the assault, and his chief purpose was that the coming forth of the Nazgûl should appear only as part of his policy of war against Gondor. Therefore, when Osgiliath was taken and the bridge broken, Sauron stayed the assault, and the Nazgûl were ordered to begin the search for the ring. But Sauron did not underestimate the powers and the vigilance of the wise, and the Nazgûl were commanded to act as secretly as they could. Now at that time the chieftain of the Ringwraiths dwelt in Minas Morgul with 6 companions, while the second to the chief, Gamul, the Shadow of the East, abode in Dol Guldur as Sauron's lieutenant, with one other as his messenger. The Lord of Morgul therefore led his companions over Anduin, unclad and unmounted and invisible to eyes, and yet a terror to all living things that they passed near. It was, maybe, on the 1st day of July that they went forth. They passed slowly and in stealth through Arnorian and over the Entwade, and so into the wold, and a rumour of darkness and a dread of men knew not what went before them. They reached the west shores of Anduin a little north of San Gebbia, as they had trysted, and there received horses and raiment that were secretly ferried over the river. This was, it is thought, about the 17th of July. Then they passed northward, seeking for the Shire, the land of the Halflings. About the 22nd of July they met their companions, the Nazgûl of Dol Guldur, in the field of Celebrant. There they learned that Gollum had eluded both the orcs that recaptured him and the elves that pursued them, and had vanished. They were told also by Camul that no dwelling of halflings could be discovered in the vales of Anduin, and that the villages of the Stores by the Gladden had long been deserted. But the Lord of Morgul, seeing no better counsel, determined still to seek northward, hoping maybe to come upon Gollum, as well as to discover the Shire. That this would prove to be not far from the hated land of Lorien seemed to him not unlikely, if it was not indeed within the fences of Galadriel. But the power of the White Ring he would not defy, nor yet enter into Lorien. Passing therefore between Lorien and the mountains, the nine rode ever on into the north, and terror went before them and lingered behind them. But they did not find what they sought, nor learn any news that availed them. At length they returned, but the sun was now far waned, and the wrath and fear of Sauron was mounting. When they came back to the wold, September had come, and there they met messengers from Barad-dûr, conveying threats from their master that filled even the Morgul lord with dismay. For Sauron had now learned of the words of prophecy heard in Gondor, and the going forth of Boromir, of Saruman's deeds, and the capture of Gandalf. From these things he concluded indeed that neither Saruman nor any other of the wise had possession yet of the ring, but that Saruman at least knew where it might be hidden. Speed alone would now serve, and secrecy must be abandoned. The ring-wraiths, therefore, were ordered to go straight to Isengard. They rode then through Rohan in haste, and the terror of their passing was so great that many folk fled from the land and went wildly away north and west, believing that war out of the east was coming on the heels of the black horses. 2 days after Gandalf had departed from Orthanc, the Lord of Morgul halted before the gate of Isengard. Then Saruman, already filled with wrath and fear by the escape of Gandalf, perceived the peril of standing between enemies, a known traitor to both. His dread was great, for his hope of deceiving Sauron, or at least of receiving his favour in victory, was utterly lost. Now either he himself must gain the ring or come to ruin and torment. But he was wary and cunning still, and he had ordered Isengard against just such an evil chance. The circle of Isengard was too strong for even the lords of Morgul and his company to assail with that great force of war. Therefore to his challenge and demands he received only the answer of the voice of Saruman, that spoke by some art as though it came from the gate itself. "It is not a land that you look for," it said. "I know what you seek, though you do not name it. I have it not, as surely its servants perceive without telling, for if I had it, then you would bow before me and call me lord. And if I knew where this thing was hid, I should not be here, but long gone before you take it. There is one only whom I guess to have this knowledge, Mithrandir, enemy of Sauron, and since it is but 2 days since he departed from Isengard, seek him nearby." Such was still the power of the voice of Saruman that even the Lord of the Nazgûl did not question what it said, whether it was false or short of the full truth. But straightway he rode from the gate and began to hunt for Gandalf in Rohan. Thus it was that on the evening of the next day the Black Riders came upon Grima Wormtongue as he hastened to bring word to Saruman that Gandalf was come to Edoras, and had warned King Theoden of the treacherous designs of Isengard. In that hour the Worm-tongue came near to death by terror, but being inured to treachery, he would have told all that he knew under less threat. Yea, verily, I can tell you, lord, he said, I have overheard their speech together in Isengard, the land of the halflings. It was thence that Gandalf came, and desires to return. He seeks now only a horse. Spare me, I speak as swiftly as I may, west through the gap of Rohan yonder, and then north and a little west, until the next great river bars the way. The Grey Flood it is called. Thence, from the crossing at Tharbad, the old road will lead you to the borders. The Shire, they call it. Yea, verily Saruman knows of it. Goods came to him from that land down the road. Spare me, lord, indeed I will say naught of our meeting to any that live. The Lord of the Nazgul spared the life of the Worm-tongue, not out of pity, but because he deemed that so great a terror was upon him that he would never dare to speak of their encounter, as proved true. And he saw that the creature was evil, and was likely to do great harm yet to Saruman, if he lived. So he left him lying on the ground, and rode away, and did not trouble to go back to Isengard. Sauron's vengeance could wait. Now he divided his company into 4 pairs, and they rode separately, but he himself went ahead with the swiftest pair. Thus they passed west out of Rohan, and explored the desolation of Endwaith, and came at last to Tharbad. Thence they rode through Minhirath, and even though they were not yet assembled, a rumour of dread spread about them, and the creatures of the wild hid themselves, and lonely men fled away. But some fugitives on the road they captured, and to the delight of the captain, 2 proved to be spies and servants of Saruman. One of them had been used much in the traffic between Isengard and the Shire, and though he had not himself been beyond the South Farthing, he had charts prepared by Saruman which clearly depicted and described the Shire. These the Nazgul took, and then sent him on to Bree to continue spying, but warned him that he was now in the service of Mordor, and that if he ever tried to return to Isengard, they would slay him with torture. Night was waning on the 22nd day of September, when drawing together again they came to Sarn Ford and the southernmost borders of the Shire. They found them guarded, for the rangers barred their way, but this was a task beyond the power of the Dunedain, and maybe it would still have proved so even if their captain Aragorn had been with them. But he was away to the north, upon the east road near Bree, and the hearts even of the Dunedain misgave them. Some fled northward, hoping to bear news to Aragorn, but they were pursued and slain, or driven away into the wild. Some still dared to bar the ford, and held it while day lasted, but at night the Lord of Morgul swept them away, and the black riders passed into the Shire. And ere the cocks crowed in the small hours of the 23rd day of September, some were riding north through the land, even as Gandalf upon Shadowfax was riding over Rohan far behind.